Hello, everybody. Hopefully we can get some people. Looks like we've got some people rolling in. Perfect. We've got Cindy, Elizabeth, Alicia, Freddie, Jeremiah's note taker. I hope Jeremiah is actually coming. Sometimes you might actually just send your note taker now to a session like this. That actually wouldn't that be just kind of like a Black Mirror episode in itself? Um,
You don't attend anything,
and
you're no.
that's it. I would love for everyone to figure out number one, can you hear us and see us? And by hearing and seeing us, can you just tell us where you're from and whether you are how big your organization is? So, how many people you have in your organization? I'd love to be able to just get this conversation going. So, where are you from and how big is your organization? In the chat, s'il vous plaît. Also, je peux parler français aussi if anyone needs an answer in French. And Damien, I don't know what language they speak other than English in Ireland, but
Oh, we speak Irish as well. You know, it
speak
is a language.
Irish.
Yes. Yeah. Quite poorly, but
Do do you speak that language?
no, not really. People from Dublin
Okay.
don't tend to.
All right. All right. Cool. All right. We've got Strad here. He's on in Ontario, 200 people, which is great. We've got Orna, who's in the Philippines with 50 people. We've got Murrieta, California, 15 people. Tish, um, great, fantastic group of people. All right, we've got Damlana, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, from Turkey, living in the United States, and has companies in 3 countries. Wow, and has 22 people. That must be stressful.
Hmm.
Almira from Irvine, California, 700. Cindy from Rochester, 25 people. Great. We've got Laura in Boston, 100 people. Bonnie in Montreal, which is actually where I'm located, Bonnie, 9 people. Very, very cool. All right. So we're going to get started in basically right now. And I wanted to first introduce myself, and then Damien, you can introduce yourself. So my name is Liam Martin. I'm co-founder and chief innovation officer here at Time Doctor. So my goal is to really try to figure out all of the data that we collect inside of Time Doctor and figure out what kind of products and services we're building over the next 3 years. And this allows me to be able to really kind of go deep into the data, which is specifically what we want to be able to talk about right now. Like what makes up productivity and what particular blind spots do you have in your own personal productivity? Damien, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Liam. And thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Damien King. I am the Director of Solutions here at Time Doctor. I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland. And yeah, we're thrilled to have you all here today. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be exploring some of the common misconceptions around productivity, maybe offer a clearer, more data-backed approach so that we can emulate some high performing organizations that we are already have. So yeah, as I said, thrilled to have you here today, and thank you for joining.
Great. And I think a lot of you already figured out how to use the chat. And so if you have questions, please put them down in the chat. We can answer them as quickly as possible. We actually have someone in the chat right now that will be able to help you in terms of answering questions. And also, sometimes if you are thinking, oh, I don't really understand that concept, or that doesn't seem to make sense to me, usually there are 20 other people that also have that same question as well. So please don't be shy, put it in the chat. And that way we can get as much back and forth as humanly possible and make this 45 minutes to an hour as productive for you as humanly possible, because we're big on productivity, as you're going to see through this presentation. All right,
Addition
so
as well,
agenda. Yeah, go ahead.
we do a space at the end for Q&A. Just to, yeah, you can see it there.
Yes, and that's also true. So at the end of this presentation, we're going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A. We'll be able to get into this deep. So if we can't answer the question directly in the chat, we will be answering it in the Q&A. So if you have questions, just pop them in there And again, if we can't answer them directly, we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. So the agenda is relatively simple. We're going to be getting into the executive pressure map. Where are the different things that are happening inside of the HR world and generally the business world that you need to be able to juggle as an executive inside of a company? Then we're going to be going into the top 5 false signals that pass for productivity that we are currently seeing today, the real cost of obsolete productivity metrics, and then how leading organizations are actually measuring productivity and performance today that we're seeing inside of Time Doctor. We have over 10,000 customers with millions and millions of hours that are tracked every single day throughout our network, with hundreds of thousands of users throughout our network. So this is us data mining this information and then coalescing it for you so that it's as actionable as humanly possible. Then we're going to get into some key takeaways and some next steps, and then we'll get into Q&A. Before we get into that, I'd love to be able to start off with a poll question, which Damien is going to be talking about.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Liam. Before we dive into the content, and we got some great content coming up. First poll question, you're going to see it pop up on your screens now. What is your biggest productivity challenge right now? Okay. Too many distractions, burnout or low energy, hard to measure real output, misaligned priorities, or all of the above. Okay. If there's anything else in terms of big challenges that you're facing, pop it in the chat by all means. If distractions, burned out, misaligned priorities, and then what we'll do is we'll have a look at these results as they're coming in. I'm having a look at them now.
Wow.
It's quite a
That's an
big,
interesting result.
yeah, quite a large slant in one direction. Well,
Yeah.
apart from all. Interesting.
So we call it?
Yeah, let's call
Okay. And
Yeah.
a poll. All right. And let me share those results. Oh, there we go. You did it already. So it looks like hard to measure real output. That's an interesting one and so applicable to this session. And then the second place is all of the above, which would have been me for sure.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's and again, if anyone has more detailed questions that they want to ask specifically about what your biggest productivity challenges are right now, I'd love to actually know, for anyone that clicked on hard to measure real output, if you want, put in more detail about that in the chat. So what do you mean by real output specifically, so that we can also help answer that for you in the Q&A. All right. So executive pressure map. Here's the deal. I'm an executive at 2 technology companies, to be completely honest with you, Time Doctor being the biggest one. And one of the biggest things that I really see, and I think probably if you're watching this too, you probably share this perspective, is you have to be able to juggle a whole bunch of different things, right? You got to understand what performance metrics you're going to be looking at, what type of engagement you're having inside of your organization, what type of retention are you looking at long term in the company. And so you have to really figure out, like, who's performing, who's burned out, and where are the actual bottlenecks that are occurring. And this is really, I think, to anyone that looks at people management, that probably just sums it up fundamentally. I don't know about you, Damien, in your perspective, but to me, when it's like, okay, who's performing? Who are your top performers inside of your organization? Who are the people that are possibly burnt out that are in that top performance bucket? And then where are the particular bottlenecks that are occurring? Because if you have top performers that are in that burnout state, they usually are experiencing a certain form of a bottleneck to some
Yeah.
degree. So,
And sorry, Liam, like just to add to that, like this is something that we're going to be exploring further on. We have some real world examples to kind of talk about companies that who came to us that were kind of flying blind around these particular areas, right? They had no idea who their top performers were, who was burnt out, where the bottlenecks were, right? So that's kind of what we're going to explore in more detail. These 3 specific areas and how we can help uncover those problems.
yeah, yeah. So What we're going to be really focusing on right now is identifying, and initially this slide, we thought that we were going to actually not include the outdated productivity metrics and ask people like, how many of you people are measuring hours worked or online status or number of meetings or manual timesheets or task completions? But then we thought that would be unfair and a little bit mean, to be honest with you, because probably all of you are measuring some of those metrics in some degree. And I measure some of those metrics, but here's the reality is that in the 2025 plus world, those are outdated metrics. And those are not the ones that really are the new tip of the spear when you look at productivity metrics and the newest research that is being done today to really identify a high performer versus a low performer. And more specifically, to actually identify high performers that you are not aware of, which are the real keys to actually growing your organization, at least in my opinion. What do you think about it, Damien?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And generally, when we see somebody come to Time Doctor for the first time, these are the metrics that they're looking at, right? But the issue is with them is that they're a little bit one-dimensional. They're surface level metrics. They're not really telling the full story. Okay, so for example, like online status. So many companies that we speak to initially, when I ask them, it's like, well, what are you currently doing to be able to try and determine productivity? It's like, well,
Mm,
if they're online, we can see by their teams. If they're a Microsoft house, they'll be using Teams. You can see that they're green. Like, okay, cool. What does that really tell you? Nothing really. It's
mhm.
not really telling you about their journey from A to B. It's just giving
Yeah.
you a status of them being online, right? So that's where outdated. I don't know. There's still some value in these metrics. Absolutely, we're not saying that they're useless, but it's just that it's not telling the full story. It's not getting to the level of granularity that you need. You know.
I like to call these chocolate broccoli. So we have all of these, by the way, inside of Time Doctor. So if you want to have access to this type of data, we can absolutely provide it to you. That's the chocolate because that's what people are initially looking for. But then after you actually tunnel down into the data and really analyze what's going on with a fully featured workforce analytics tool, that's where we get to the broccoli. That's where we get to the real nutrition of where you're going to really start to identify what people are doing. I never actually technically dipped a piece of broccoli in chocolate. I should probably do it one day because I mention it all the time. Poll question number 2 by Damien.
Yeah. Quick check in again. Don't worry, we're not going to kill you with polls here. There's only 3 polls, but this is the set. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, how do you currently measure productivity? Okay, hours worked, task completion, KPIs only, output volume, or a combination. Again, like the last one, if there's anything else that we're not covering in this, please add it in the chat. If there's currently elements that you use to measure productivity.
And also,
Um,
this is a safe space, by the way.
yeah, yeah, no
If you know
judgment.
what we just talked about before, talking about how these are all outdated metrics, it's okay if you've chosen one of those outdated metrics as your primary source of measurement. That's the purpose of this session, is to be able to get us to that point. um,
I think there's a
what is a
question.
KPI? Tish is asking, what is a KPI? It is a key, what does it stand for?
Performance
Someone in the
performance
chat might be able to answer that.
key performance indicator.
Key performance indicator. There we go. Bonnie just answered it. Key performance indicator. And yeah, it looks like I think we're finished. We've got one
And
more. There we
just
go. We
just
can
to give
end.
you an example of that, Tish, let's say, for example, if we take a call center agent, for example, a KPI that they might have would be to make 40 calls a day, right? That's their KPI. They are assigned to that. That's the number that they have to hit every day. But again, it's very surface level. It's not telling you about the quality of those calls, etc. So it's like it's a real macro number.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
We'll call it
Yeah. Yeah.
for the
Sure.
results. Oops. There you go. All right. So that's quite interesting. What do you think?
Hours worked, combination. Yeah. Hours worked. I mean, we have
Yeah.
a really, really good example um, of that later on about how
Mhm.
just because you're working a certain number of hours, it really actually isn't a huge indicator as to whether you're working really effectively, you know?
Yeah.
Um, But that's interesting though. Yeah, hours work. It makes sense. I mean, it makes complete sense because it's probably the easiest thing to track when people start and when
Right.
they finish. But it
Yep.
doesn't tell
And
you.
also, if you're just measuring that, that means it's better than measuring nothing. But
Yeah, of course.
there is definitely a lot more that you can look at to be able to just push by hours worked and get into that more granular data, which we're going to be getting into. So next is I want to be able to get into the real cost of implementing these obsolete productivity metrics, right? So it really boils down to three core things that we've seen with our particular customers. Number one is false positives. So, and let's bring up the hours worked example that a lot of people have clicked on. If you're just measuring success by how many hours you're working and not the actual output that's generated by those hours, then that's a false positive for sure. And we see this a lot inside of our organization and the customers that we serve is just measuring hours does not necessarily mean that you're actually going to be identifying those diamonds in the rough that you really need to be able to work with in order to have a long-term successful organization. And I know for me, when I look and I try to find those diamonds in the rough, it's the 5 or 10% of people that really produce 30, 40, 50% of the company's gains because they have that insight to real and they're very passionate about the particular product or service that they're serving or that they're producing. And that's for me is so important to be able to identify because a lot of the times those front end people get missed because just executives can't really see that data. Next one is being missing the burnout signals. I have to tell you, we're going to get into a story specifically about this. This is a personal vendetta for me is identifying when someone is burning out before they've actually burnt out because at the point in which it's at an exit interview it's too late, right? And you need to be able to get out in front of this 3, 6, 9, 18 months beforehand when this process actually starts. So we're going to be talking about that in a lot more detail. And then third is reactive leadership, right? You want to be proactive in terms of how you're operating your business, right? You want to be able to identify when those things are just starting to turn and get out in front of it and try to solve that problem, as opposed to thinking, oh, well, if I just give someone a 5% raise, it's going to solve all of their problems. That doesn't solve their problems. And it actually, in some cases, makes the burnout and false positives even more of a bigger problem because you're dealing with things from a top down approach and thinking about it reactively as opposed to thinking, what do you really want? Right. Like, I don't want a 5% raise. I actually want more help in my
Yeah,
position. And you just gave me a 5% raise. Please hire someone to work with me. Right. That's what people really want. And you have to really understand that in the data. And the beauty of 2025 workforce analytics is that you can actually identify those things relatively simply in a simple way.
for
Let's
sure.
go on to the next one here. I think this one is yours, Damien.
And thanks for that, Liam. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to give you some real world examples, and one specifically right now. It actually mentions it speaks to the burnout that Liam just mentioned. Okay, so we had a prospect that came to us, a global logistics company, and they had suspicions. They had an issue that they suspected, but they had no solid data to back up this suspicion. And the suspicion was that there was a small subset of their workers, their employees, that were shouldering a larger part of the burden. Right now, how they came to realize this initially was some manager feedback. Right, some of the employees were saying this. There was murmurings that were talking within the company from managers, but most strikingly, this feedback came from an exit interview from a high performer. A high performer that they did not identify as somebody that was ever going to leave, right? So there was
Mm,
no signal, no indicator whatsoever, apart from when they handed in their notice. And then during the exit interview, and the feedback was, I'm doing all the work here and I'm sick of it. Okay. So their hypothesis was that this was, more of a problem, more of a widespread problem throughout the organization. Okay. So when they came to us, that was their initial hypothesis and concern. So what we did was we ran a trial of Time Doctor, and the results, even within the first 2 weeks of that trial, were quite remarkable because what we could determine that this was not just a singular or an isolated issue, it was omnipresent throughout their organization. You had, we could determine through the data that it was between 15 to 20% of their employees were shouldering 75 to 80% of the burden of the work, right? So obviously we don't need to kind of go into a huge amount of detail in terms of what kind of a risk that is. But by showcasing that data very quickly, the whole point is that it's going to empower managers to be able to get ahead of it, right? To put their arm around those employees, those ones that are at risk of burnout, to try and redress the balance. Okay, that's essentially what it's doing. It's trying to create a more equitable workspace whereby everyone is shouldering the burden and the floor will naturally rise. Okay, and
Mm.
the time to value of that data was so quick, like because we can see it straight away. Give us a week, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks worth of data, and you can tell that very, very quickly. You can see who the people are who are shouldering all that burden and doing the work. So not only is it redressing the equity, but it's also understanding what that person does of a day. Okay, so what your best people do, so that is an opportunity to train and enable everyone else to get up to a higher standard, right? But the problem is you've got an elite group of people who are getting burnt out, and they're at risk of leaving. So by doing
Mhm.
this, it was a great preemptive approach. You're not being reactive; you're being proactive. And yeah, it was a huge turnaround for them. So yeah.
This is a classic. I don't know if anyone knows the concept of the Pareto principle. So, generally, in any organization, and this is true in all of HR, uh, if you take the square root of any organization, that square root usually does 80% of the actual work, which is wild when you think about it. And it doesn't matter whether you actually, so if you have like an organization of 10,000 people or 10 organizations, and then you grab all of the high performers, all of that square roots of people that are producing that 80% output, and you put them all in another company, they'll still see that square root of that company end up producing 80% of the results. So what you need to do inside of an organization is really identify who those people are. And what we've found is that managers, on average, have no clue who those people are inside of the organization when we look at the actual data and we look at the output that they're generating. So there's a lot of false signals that kind of connect to that. And that's really important because you never want to have an exit interview with someone that you wanted to keep and they said, I'm doing all the work here and I'm sick of it.
Mm.
That's not something that anyone wants. That is, and I mean, that's the definition of failure in in my opinion, if you're an HR professional or an executive in any particular position.
And just before we
So,
jump on, like just in the
yep.
chat, well, again, no judgment. If anyone has experienced that before, please let us know. Like obviously, keep it anonymized, but if anyone has experienced their best performers leave, because they felt like they were shouldering all the burden, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, yeah, safe space as well.
Yeah,
I know that I've had that experience multiple times,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I've
yeah.
had people that I've said, I've gotten out of an exit interview, and thought to myself, what could we have done
Mhm.
3, 6, 9, 12 months ago to be able to help save this person? Because that singular person is going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace because
Mhm.
we didn't pay attention to the signals earlier enough. So if anyone has that perspective as well or has experienced that, I'd love for us to share our pain in the chat. Let's go into the first myth that we have. And again, we haven't necessarily put these in any particular order, but these are the ones that we see most often inside of our customer base. So if anyone has any questions, please put it down in the chat as well. So myth number one, more hours equals more productivity. Um, I know for me, that is one of the big pieces that, as I said, that chocolate broccoli at the beginning of of a customer's journey. It's okay. How many hours are we tracking? How many hours are we tracking? I'm tracking more hours. And that's not actually what you need to be able to identify. What you need to be able to identify is something called flow state focus. And so this is essentially, and there's a ton of books that are written on this particular subject, but if it is a very difficult problem to solve and your team member is excited about solving it and has all of the resources available to them in order to be able to solve it, if you can optimize your organization towards flow state focus, you will have an unbeatable team. But the real issue is that the majority of the time, people are just putting in hours and not necessarily actually measuring the output from those hours. So the person that comes at the beginning of the day and then is the last person to leave, that person may not actually be the most productive team member inside of your organization, and you need to be able to measure that. But Damien, I know you have a specific case study to speak towards this.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. For sure. By way of a real world example, we had a large healthcare company, and they came to us. They were a client of ours, but they were bringing on some extra contract workers, right? The main
Mhm.
issue was with these back office contract workers was that the workers were paid by the hour. Okay, so it would clearly benefit the contract workers to work more hours, right? That makes sense. Okay, when the client came to us, the issue they had was they had very little visibility into what went into those hours, right? So like they knew when they started, they knew when they finished, but they didn't know what went in between that, what got them from A to B. Okay, so they had a start and finish time. They could judge the outcome, like they could judge what their work was, what their output was, but they didn't know, they were still in the dark about what that journey was. Okay, so once we plugged in Time Doctor, we're able to see the vast majority of the contract workers were spending a huge amount of time in the wrong places, places that were completely unrelated to their everyday productivity. And by the way, I'm not talking about disaster area here. I'm not saying that they were on YouTube and Netflix all day. What I'm saying is that they were spending time in the wrong tools. So, for example, and we all do this. I do this for myself. The amount of times that I've seen myself spending hours upon hours in Slack or Zoom or different areas when I should be focused more on the things that are going to progress the business and myself, etc. Um, and here's the thing: this was the learning, right? So you might think to yourself, okay, well, that's great information to have. But what am I going to do with it? How do I approach my team about this? Okay, because it's a touchy subject, right? Be like, okay, you're working in these areas. Here's how we know this is how you're meant to work. As long as you do it in the right way, as long as you communicate it, you're transparent, you're upfront in the right way, and this is what we help them to do. We help with the communication of that. Okay, then their contract workers responded positively because there was a learning from it, right? If you're a
Mm.
worker, if you're a contract worker and you figure, okay, well, hang on, I'm spending 12 of my 40-hour working week in Slack, for example, that's a bad use of my time. Okay, cool. I can readjust. It's about training enablement for people to be able to progress. So yeah, we solved a massive problem for them. And it wasn't necessarily overly negative, it was just a learning. Okay. It was a real training opportunity.
I
And
call that talking about work as opposed to doing work. And
yeah,
there's a lot of talking about doing work, but then you actually need to do the work. And obviously, you need meetings and you need that type of cross collaboration inside of an organization. But the
of course.
issue is that there's a certain ratio in which that just really is redundant
Yeah.
fundamentally, and that's what you're speaking to. Damien,
Yeah.
let's jump on to myth two here because I don't want to make sure I want to make sure that everybody has as much time as possible. We have as much time as possible to go through these. Next myth is time tracking is equaling surveillance. We get this a lot at Time Doctor, and I know for me personally, the reason why we started this tool was I don't think I've ever told you this, Damien, is Tuesday afternoons. I actually ended up having like a horrible productivity hole. I could not get any work done. And what I discovered after using a few weeks of Time Doctor was, and this was many years ago, I started this company with my co-founder when I was 26, I think, 27. And at that time, I was single and I would always go out to a cheap Tuesday movie night when I didn't have kids. So like you'd go to the matinee because it's half price. I don't know in Canada it's half price on Tuesdays. And so the message was started like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Are we going to go to Batman or are we going to go to Superman? Uh, oh, well, Susan wants to go to Batman and John wants to go to Superman. Okay, what's going on here? And I'd have to be back and forth constantly on this thing. And I couldn't actually get into that flow state focus that I talked about previously. And so this was actually destroying my productivity. And counterintuitively, actually measuring it was the ability for me to actually get better at my job. And the solution that I had for it, by the way, is I took Tuesdays off. I took Tuesday afternoons off. Basically, after lunch, I just said, okay, I'm just going to go hang out with my friends on Tuesdays. And my overall output went up. So this is something, I mean, it's very counterintuitive to be able to think about, but working less actually allowed me to be able to achieve more. But
Yeah.
Damien, you have another story connected to this as well.
Well, yeah, like it's really my story, Liam. And look, I'm just going to be perfectly frank and honest. Like, I speak with prospects every single day who have this perception that Time Doctor or workforce analytics is surveillance. It's Big Brother, right? And it it has the potential to be used in that way, right? So at Time Doctor, look, we fervently advocate for transparency and openness. Okay, that is the best way to get the most out of this platform. Okay, our software should be used in tandem and agreement with your employees. Okay, not to be try and circumvent or to try and surveil without their knowledge. Okay, that's not what we're advocating for. So just very quickly, when I started in Time Doctor almost a year ago, on the 10th of June 2024. And I think I've already said this, I'm from Ireland, I'm from Europe. We tend to be, I know this is a bit of a gross generalization, but we tend to be a little bit more, uh, I suppose, conscious about our data privacy, like GDPR, for example, right? Kind of drilled into us quite early that, like, oh, it's my data and nobody else should have it, right? So we tend to be a little bit more skeptical. And I was super skeptical when I started with Time Doctor about what it was, right? So I was like, I don't know if this is going to be something that I want to utilize, right? So I went from that to we all use Time Doctor here at Time Doctor. We all use the software, and because I am in control of the data, because I can start and stop a timer, because I can select different projects and tasks that I'm working on. For me, it's the most amazing time management tool because what it does is it allows me to stay focused and to stay on track. Okay. So uh, I went from basically kind of jumping in and out of meetings. And I already talked about this, but Slack as well. Just I could see within a week, within 2 weeks, I could see the amount of time that I was wasting in areas that were not progressing me in my career forward or the business. So it
Yeah.
allowed me to self-identify and self-correct really, really quickly. And now it becomes second nature, Liam, doesn't it? Because like you use it as well.
Yep.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
and that's the whole point that we're trying to get across is like it's not surveillance if I'm in control of the data, if I can see the data, if I have the opportunity to be able to self-identify and improve because of what I'm doing, and I can keep myself in check every single day. So yeah,
I'd
that's
love
my
to get just a question down in the chat. Has anyone used any workforce analytics tool that like Time Doctor? Because we'd love to be able to get your perspective on it. It is one of those things that if you can actually overcome, Bonnie says not yet, but maybe soon, Bonnie. But anyone else down in the chat, I'd love to be able to hear the experience. It looks like Fu uses Tempo, which is pretty cool. Anyone else, please put it down there. I'd love to be able to get your feedback on it. Next one is more output equals more progress, right? I think that this is one of those things that we really have to be able to kind of look at when we understand um, not all work is equal. Not all work drives the business forward. So we need to be able to identify the difference between volume and actually like getting your work done. I think a lot about this with regards to a hammer versus a scalpel. And I use these analogies all the time. Probably Damien is pretty sick of it. But if you actually go out and you say, I'm going to go and work an extra 2 hours per day, but where are you actually going to put that time? How is it going to be deployed more effectively versus I'm going to produce more output, right? So it's not so much about the actual hours worked, it's hours worked divided by output. And that's the part that I think we need to really kind of recognize. And it's so difficult for be it for HR, executives, anyone that's really kind of managing a large group of people to be able to get over that because fundamentally from the top down, hammering people saying working more is usually actually going to get you a productivity boost. But if you take the scalpel approach to be able to figure out where specifically are you spending your time and how can we optimize that, that's something that actually ends up producing a much better return on investment. But Damien, I think you've got something else to say to this as well.
Yeah, and again, this is just kind of my final real world example. We had a large household name tech company came to us who they had a certain amount of their workers who were remote, okay, software engineers based in a certain geographic location. Now, the problem was they had no idea. All these people were remote. They had no idea about what they were doing in their day to day. Okay. And that was when they came to us and they're like, hey, look, we want to run a POC. We want to see, figure out what it is that they're doing. We have a fair idea. This is a really, really good company, by the way. Very good processes, very good culture, everything. Oh, they had all of the right ingredients in place. And they had a very clear idea, or they thought they had a very clear idea about who their top performers were. Okay. And once we plugged in the software and we ran this POC for 800 of their software engineers, by the way, um, there was a very strange, it was kind of like the converse of what they thought. It was when they saw the data and they saw the amount of activity, the sheer activity that these engineers were doing, because with Time Doctor, we can determine the level of interaction you have with your device. We call it the activity summary, which essentially means how much idle time or how much activity you have on your device, like your keyboard and your mouse, for example. And they could see when the data came out that they thought that their best performers would be the people who were most active on their devices, that they had what we call very little idle time. But in actual
Seems
fact, it was,
logical, right?
yeah, it was the converse,
Yeah.
right? It was their best performers were the people who had 30, 40, 50% of their day was spent in an idle state. Why is that, Liam? Well, because they're probably ingesting, digesting information. They're probably reading a lot more, as opposed to those people who are, frantically typing and, output and like they're maybe not thinking about the bigger picture or trying to figure out maybe how I can do something easier or better or like that kind of scenario. So that was a huge eye opener for them because we could show that to them within 3 to 4 weeks that what
Yeah.
they thought were the metrics that they were looking at. They're like, actually, no, idle time is okay. That's totally normal because our best performers, this is the new benchmark for what success is.
Yeah,
So
and we've actually found a very clear correlation specifically inside of engineers. And we have all of these different job types that you can get access to inside of Time Doctor to be able to analyze this data a little bit deeper. But an engineer is actually the most closely correlated towards a creative writer. And so when you think about writing code as I don't know if anyone manages engineers in any context. I'd love to hear if you do, because I'd love to hear your perspective on it. They're uniquely difficult to be able to measure. Cindy says lots, perfect. And so when you look at lines written, if you just measure someone by lines written, it's actually a really bad metric. And a much better metric is net lines written. Because if you actually look at someone writing better code that produces a much better result and is cleaner, that actually has a lot more idle time associated with it. But again, we didn't want to necessarily bore people with specific jobs and how they work, but I could get into this nerdy stuff all day long. Let's get on to the next myth here. All right, we're into the next poll question. So,
yeah,
Damien, take it away.
final poll. Yeah. So which of these myths do you see most within your team? Focus on hours, obsession with quantity, overvaluing presence, measuring tool clicks, relying on task count, comparing people directly, or all of the above. Okay. Again, like always, if there's something else in there, some other myths that you see, please add it into the chat.
Okay, this will be an interesting one. It's the longest one we've had so far.
It
That's
is.
always a little bit more stressful. It's
Yeah.
like some people are clicking on focusing on hours, obsession with quantity. That's good. Maybe I shouldn't be saying these things as they're dropping live. I don't want to bias anybody's decision making. But I find this kind of stuff really fun.
Mm.
I like live polls. That's why we have so many in this session.
Session with
By the way, this
quantity.
will be the last one, I believe, right, Damien? This is the last
It
one.
is, yeah. The final poll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My standard answer is like, why don't we throw another poll in? And Damien kind of rolls his eyes. I see it non-verbally, and it's okay, but I just love
Yeah.
polls
The polls
so
are great.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. You want to call it?
Yeah. Let's end it. Okay. Let's share these results.
Obsession with quantity.
Interesting.
Interesting. That is a again, this is a chocolate broccoli problem,
Mm.
right? It's not about quantity, it's about quality. And the only way that you can identify quality is through workforce analytics,
Mhm.
fundamentally. There's no other better way to do it, particularly if you're a hybrid team or a remote team, to be able to measure that without a workforce analytics tool. So, and then
Yeah.
focusing on hours is the second best or the second place one, and then all of the above obviously is in there as well. That's cool. All right, so to get into how to actually do this, because we talked about all of our problems, and now we want to actually talk about some of the solutions, right? Is as we're watching right now, as you're probably watching this particular session, and this is hard data. This isn't something that we're just kind of pulling out of the top of our heads. Half of your employees are considering a new job. That's pretty scary, right? And in that, it's a lot of those high performers, those diamond in the rough, that Pareto principle, that square root of your organization that's producing 80% of the results. And so that's really scary for everyone to be able to recognize is those people could walk out tomorrow, right? And we all lived through 2020, 2021, 2022, when a lot of that job hopping happened. It's kind of calmed down a little bit more now, but it's still prevalent, right? Particularly in the age of AI, where a lot of these people that are learning these new types of skills can actually write their ticket wherever they want. So
Mm.
we want to be able to focus on really metrics that matter. So not focusing on quantity, not focusing on hours, but focusing on these types of metrics. So focus time, meaning, and what I like to call flow state, right? Where you're in that flow and you're really just in the vibe and you're working on something that you really care about and you're solving difficult problems for the business versus time spent. Time on core systems versus communication tools. So we talked about this a lot, or Damien did.
Yeah.
The actual time
That
that you
one's.
spend preparing to work. Go ahead, Damien.
Sorry, I was just going to say that one's really close to me because it was kind of shocking to me to see how much time in my working week I was spent on internal communication skills, Slack, Teams, whatever it is that you guys use. Um, because albeit yes, you need to use those tools, I was just spending too much time on them. Right. So
Yeah.
not in a productive way. Okay. And you can very
Yeah.
easily quickly identify that with Time Doctor.
And you're not the only one. Slack is our most used internal
Yeah.
application by far, right? That is the single largest category of time spent in the company is spent on Slack, which is, it's you get work done there, but it's also kind of a fun place to hang out and chat with people and kind of figure out what people are doing throughout their day. And that's something that just we need to be able, there's a ratio that we need to be
Yeah.
able to understand. And it's different based off of your job type and based off your organization. I wish I could just tell you 20% of your time should be spent on internal communications, but it's not that simple. It's actually a lot more complicated. We need to be able to analyze your data and your organization before we can come up with that ideal ratio. Um, Idle time versus output. This is very simple, right? It's like not all time is created equal. And sometimes thinking about a problem is actually better than just doing it. And so that's another part that I think a lot of people are resistant towards hearing, but it's really important with workforce analytics in order to be able to think about it in that context. Next is variance in load across your team. So how are you treating those people that are getting completely overloaded? What was the quote that you had, Damien? Um, I'm tired of doing everybody else's work and I'm leaving.
Yeah, I'm sick of it. Yeah,
Right. I'm
yeah.
sick of it, right? You don't ever want to have someone in that type of situation, right? We have so many stories about people where, and we use a lot of technology specifically to be able to identify this before it happens, where like we'll see someone's stress level and burnout level skyrocket, and then we just see the correlation, which is one of their coworkers just quit
Mhm.
because we know that they just took on that extra work, right? And then we actually can identify that, get out in front of it at the beginning, as opposed to 6 months later when we're having that exit interview and saying, okay, it looks like one of your coworkers quit. It looks like you're absolutely stressed out and you're burnt out. We're going to solve this problem for you right now so that that one, that one person leaving doesn't turn into 5 to 6 people leaving 6 months later. And then also after hours activity. We had another session before about quit prediction that me and Damien were on, which is incredibly interesting for everybody to kind of take a look at. If you're interested, we can share this deck with you in that presentation. But the number one variable for burnout risk and overtime is not actually working overtime Monday to Thursday and then on the weekend. So all of that accounted for 48% of burnout risk due to overwork. And then only working on Friday nights was a 53% impact towards burnout risk. So we tell HR professionals all the time, if you have to do overtime, if your team has to do overtime, protect Friday nights at all costs. But you can only see that data through using a tool like Time Doctor, Workforce Analytics, that has a machine learning algorithm to actually analyze that data. And then obviously looking at hundreds of thousands of users, we can come up with those types of insights. So that's a really important variable as well. And I'd love for anyone else that has any other kind of comments or concerns with regards to burnout or any of these kind of leading indicators, please put it down in the chat. We'd love to be able to talk to people about it. But we're going to get into the Q&A in just like 2 3 minutes. I'm getting messages from Mina saying, you're too late. We need to wrap this up right now. We got to go into Q&A, but just give me 2 more minutes, Mina. Please don't um, please don't yell at me later on. I can't deal with it. Here are the key takeaways. Your best people are quietly burning out. This is what you need to understand, okay? It can be very difficult to actually know why this is happening. And you need to be able to make sure that you are mindful of that. And you really can't do that in a large organization or a hybrid or remote organization without workforce analytics. It fundamentally just does not happen in the 2025 future of where HR tech is really going at this point. And Damien, I think this was actually your slide, and I stole that first point from you. Why don't you produce the next two?
You were in a flow state, Liam. I didn't want to just
I was in a
disturb.
flow state. Yeah, I mean, like this is something again. I'm very passionate about this particular subject because I think that when you implement a tool like this and you get this type of data, you're so much more productive and your team members are so much happier than they were before. So
Yeah,
I get a little bit kind of excited when I see this
yeah.
type of information and I want to
That's
share it with as many people as possible.
for sure, for sure. And look, we are getting some messages from Mina that we have to jump into the Q&A. So exit interviews are too late. In terms of what an exit interview, it's a lagging indicator, right? So essentially, what we're doing is you need more proactive data in order to be able to get ahead of that before it happens. Okay, it's kind of like the next phase of your best people are quietly burning out, and then finally, and this is a real macro level misconception or perception, should we say? I don't know what misconception, but perception that we wanted to address on this call. Productivity analytics isn't about micromanagement. Okay. It's about measuring impact. Okay. Both positive and negative, right? But if you're going to use it to monitor without using being transparent about it, it is not going to work. Okay, what you're going to get are you're going to get negative results. What we advocate for is openness and transparency, where people are enabled to self-identify and self-improve because they have access to their own data. So yeah, let's move to the Q&A, shall we?
The Q&A. Look, Mina's not going to yell at us anymore. We're in the Q&A now. Now, I'd love to be able to, if anyone has any questions connected to, again, I just talked about like all of our quit prediction analytics, all the data kind of connected to where people are spending their time. Absolutely ask that question. You can get as minute as you possibly can, and we can probably answer it. But we're going to go into a few of the questions that were already at the top. Um, I think you can
Yeah.
actually take this first one on, Damien, which was Cindy. And Cindy was asking, I was hoping Time Doctor could be used for surveillance, essentially, both for cybersecurity and for work at home. How do you speak to that, Damien?
Um, I would probably have a follow-up question on that. What do
Okay.
you mean by both for cybersecurity and for work at home?
Yeah,
If
that
you're
would be
there,
great, Cindy, if you could add that there.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, it depends on what you mean by that surveillance, and just a little bit more context will be great, Cindy, if you're still there.
Yeah. And also, too, Cindy, if you want to actually, oh, and okay, we've got a question from Axel. Will Time Doctor have a quick video capture of low productivity screenshots? Low productivity screenshots. Hmm. So we do have a video capture feature that you can get access to, Axel, and you can turn that on and off depending upon the situation. Generally, what we suggest that people do is turn that on whenever there's a like really big security risk. So, as an example, let's say that you're putting in credit card information, or you're dealing with a lot of financial data, that type of a thing, and you might want to be able to, or even better, this is a situation that impacts us quite a bit. You're moving a massive data set of customer data from one place to another. That's where you might want to be able to make sure that you have very clear measurement of what's going on, so that if there is any issue that pops up in the future, you can then say, okay, I have that documentation in place, and Axel was actually moving these files in the right direction, and he didn't save a local version to his own computer, as an example, that type of a thing. But that is actually a feature. So if you go into the pricing page on Time Doctor, you'll be able to actually get access to that, which is
I
right
might
there.
also
So if you go to,
very
yeah,
quickly,
go ahead,
sorry,
Damien.
apologies, but we do also capture low activity screenshots. So within the activity summary, let's say, for example, if there's
Yeah,
uh, areas of low productivity from within Time Doctor, you go to reports, you go to activity summary, and then from within that, we have screen captures if they're turned on, screen captures that will verify that activity that happened. So if you turn on screen capture for a specific user, we will also capture areas where they have low activity or low productivity. Yeah.
another feature as well, Axel, that you might be interested in is the the unusual activity report. So I show this all the time. Damien knows what this is. Does anyone know what this is? I would love if anyone knows what it is and can tell me. You will get a free copy of our Wall Street Journal best-selling book, Running Remote, which is available in bookstores everywhere. But we can literally have it sent to you directly. Oh, okay. El Maja. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Um, you're going to get a free book. Yes, this is a mouse jiggler. And what it does is you have this physical device, you put your mouse on top of it, and it moves, and it basically makes you think that you are working more hours than you actually are. And again, this just kind of reinforces what we're talking about is hours tracked does not actually mean the true measurement of productivity. So what you can do is we have a report called the unusual activity report, where it will be able to measure that, and it will be able to confirm that with screenshots. if you have that feature turned on. So you can
Yeah.
see specifically where that low activity is, that unusual activity is occurring. And Axel, that might be low activity, that might be not, I'm moving my mouse, but I'm not moving my keyboard. When you look at any of these types of movements, a computer moves in a very specific way, and humans move in a chaotic and random way. And computers can't replicate that activity, but humans do it. So we understand the difference between human activity and computer-based activity fundamentally. Uh, so let's, and we're getting yelled at, but we're going to go through these questions anyways. Cindy has a follow-up, Damien. Work at home. I believe someone who says they are working are actually spending time with their son. Cyber, they are doing personal work. Okay.
So Cindy, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you're alluding to you want to see what they're doing in their home to see whether they're or not. If that's the case, then no, we don't like we're not looking through a camera or through a webcam or anything like that to
Right.
surveil the inside of their home. That's not what we do. When we talk about screenshots or screen, we're literally talking about their screen capture, what's on their screen, not surveilling them through a webcam. That would be a big no-no.
Yeah.
So
And we don't do that. And then also, Cindy, the other part is if someone is like, we can identify real work versus pretending to work, essentially. So if you have an issue where someone is playing with their son, as an example, or not doing or doing personal work, Time Doctor can completely solve that problem for you very easily. We've got another question from Orna. The problem I currently have in some of our VAs would just move their mouse or keyboard so that they won't go idle. Hence, they are not flagged as low idle, low activity. But once we jump into screenshots, they are consecutive screenshots that are just in the same screen. Okay, so unusual activity report is going to be your friend. That's going to automatically be able to detect that because you'll be able to know the difference between someone just moving their mouse around and someone actually doing real work. And again, this is just an issue of there's a bunch of different versions of these types of jigglers. There are almost 5 million that were sold after the pandemic. So a lot of them were sold, and we've reviewed all of them. I literally have like I have a closet of like 85 of them that I test. So we're very, very serious about this because we believe that this is the 2% of users that are the rotten apples that are ruining it for the entire bunch, which is stopping people from being able to work remotely. So,
mhm.
Orna, you can totally solve that problem very easily with the unusual activity report. And if you go sign up for a demo, we'll be able to show you everything kind of connected to that.
Orna has
Go
a
ahead, Damien.
follow-up because
Okay.
it's actually not unusual activity because it looks like her VAs aren't using these. What they're doing is they're just moving their mouse around, probably, as she says, probably while they're on their phone. So you know what I mean? They're just moving it every so often so that it still doesn't look like they're idle. They're just kind of
Unusual
moving.
activity report might still be able to, so you can try it for 14 days and just try that functionality, because what might be happening there is if it's just every 15 minutes the mouse is getting moved, we can also detect that as unusual activity. It's not just a mouse jiggler, it's any activity that is unusual and not like their constant, because we use a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to analyze that data. So we know the difference between Damien working and Damien pretending to work, essentially, whether you're using a mouse jiggler or whether you're just moving your mouse around every 15 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, so we have one more. Maybe we can get one more question in. We're going to try to do them fast. Can we get the basic needed monitoring features, including screen monitoring or video or snapshot capturing, etc.? How much will it cost for 15 people? So how much would it cost for 15 people to, I mean, you probably want to look at the standard plan. So if you go to pricing, and this person's name is customer service, which I don't know why your mother decided to name you that, but regardless, you should go check standard pricing. And then there's a couple different upgrades that you can and downgrades that you can do. So you can customize Time Doctor specifically for you. Probably the best goal here, the best thing you can do is just go and book a demo and they'll
Yeah.
be able to bring you through all the functionality and get the pricing all set up for you. And then, and the name is Lily. Lily, okay. And then we've got one more question. I need the meeting script, please, from Adele. I don't know what the meeting script is. Please let me know, Adele, so we can get you that information. And then Orna says unusual activity reports, idle, and screenshots really work together well for me. Great, Orna. Appreciate it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, Adele, please let us know. Sign up for a demo, and then if you actually just kind of reference this, we'll be able to get it back for you. That's probably the easiest way. And I know there was a lot of questions that everyone had. If you have any more, go to the book a demo, and literally it's just, clicking on this link. You will boot up a page. You go through, fill out your name, your business email, phone number, that kind of stuff, and then within, I think, hours, we'll be back in contact with you to be able to identify specifically what you need and just reference this particular session as well, so that if you have a specific question here, you can have it answered. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time. And other than that, very much appreciate you guys coming on. This is always super interesting for us. And if you want to email me or Damien or connect with us on LinkedIn, we're always available on LinkedIn to be able to answer any of your questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye.
all.